Dear little one, an open letter to younger self. Chapter 3. The Descent into a Memory Not Of. Written by Gabriel Ndayishimiye. The descent begins not with a step, but with a slip, a tumble into a void where the edges of reality fray like unraveling thread, and memory bleeds into imagination without form or boundary. Time folds in on itself, bending and warping like molten glass, stretching moments into brittle filaments that twist and fray. Each thread pulses with fragments of something almost known, a fleeting touch of recognition that evaporates before it solidifies, leaving only the ache of an incomplete story written in shadows. You fall deeper into the haze, where images smear across the mind like smoke caught in a beam of light, swirling, stretching, and disintegrating before form can be grasped. They are remnants of something half-remembered, scenes that stutter and skip like forgotten dreams slipping into rot. Faces emerge and disintegrate before they are named, voices melt into static, and beneath it all, the tick-tock of the bedroom clock surfaces, a sound I had long forgotten, hidden in the fabric of the room, collecting dust in its corner. Its rhythm isn't just a measure of time, it's a thread stitching together years unnoticed. The hands creep forward, carving moments into the walls, each tick a quiet witness to the passing years. The sound drifts back into my consciousness, slow, deliberate, like something returning from a forgotten corner of the mind. I hadn't thought of the clock in so long that it had become part of the room's silence, blending into the wallpaper, gathering dust on the wall. Now, it pulses with a new weight, each swing of the pendulum a chisel etching absence deeper into the space. It no longer marks time, but marks me, the sound pressing through layers of forgetting, stirring memories I thought had faded into static. I hadn't heard it in so long, and now it echoes with a new weight, filling the air like a presence long overlooked. Its rhythm is relentless, each tick a pulse, each tock a reminder of time's slow dissection of memory. The sound doesn't mark hours. It counts the spaces between breaths, between thoughts, a pendulum slicing through the haze. It swings through moments lost and moments imagined, carving time into fragments too jagged to hold. The clock doesn't measure life, it measures absence, a mechanical heartbeat that echoes in the hollow left behind. The ink of memory seeps into the cracks of thought, staining the edges until even the light bends under its weight. It spreads without pattern, marking the difference between what was and what could have been, until the boundaries blur and collapse. The past is jagged, splintering into fragments that slice through your mind when you reach for them. His absence wasn't a sudden void. It was always there, like a cold breath brushing past the skin, felt without form. You've lived in its shadow, the weight of that hollow space pressing into the contours of your being, not a scar, but a carving, a silhouette made of questions too fragile to speak aloud. And now, in this quiet reckoning, the silhouette moves, no longer a still shape but a phantom stirring in the folds of memory, pulling you deeper into a labyrinth where answers crumble before they can be held. As a child, you filled the gaps with stories, weaving narratives from the fragile fabric of longing and absence. You built him from fragments, a gesture half-remembered, a voice imagined in the lull between waking and dreams. He was a sailor, lost at sea, a soldier who never returned, a traveler who wandered too far into the horizon, swallowed by the distance. Each story unraveled as soon as it was spun, collapsing under the weight of its own impossibility. The void he left wasn't empty. It pulsed with possibility, with endless versions of him that you conjured to fill the silence. He became a flicker at the edge of your vision, an echo that never resolved into a voice. And the ache wasn't just in wondering who he truly was. It was in feeling each invented version unravel, slipping through your grasp like whispers in a language you've never spoken. The veil wasn't just draped over the hollow. It became the hollow itself, folding inward, folding infinitely, a labyrinth of empty corridors that lead nowhere. You didn't lie to fill the space. You lied to make the hollow bearable, to weave a shape around the emptiness so it wouldn't pull you inside. You lied to give the void edges, to keep it from spilling into everything you touched. And still, it bled through. In the pauses between words, in the heaviness of dreams, in the quiet where his name should have been. You didn't just lie to keep the hollow from devouring you. You lied to forget that it already had. In time, the stories stopped, not with a conclusion, but with a fading, like colors leaching from a photograph left too long in the sun, draining away until only faint outlines remain, the details ghosted over by time. The silhouette dissolved into something less tangible, a presence that flickered just beyond the edge of recognition, like a phantom reflection in a cracked mirror. It wasn't absence, it was erosion, a slow weathering of something that was never whole to begin with. And in the dust of that dissolution, you felt the weight of all that was never said, never known. Not as silence, but as a murmur buried beneath time, a resonance that had been waiting to surface. It pressed into the corners of your mind like forgotten whispers etched into stone, words worn down to fragments, sharp enough to cut, but too faint to piece together. The hollow, though, remained, a shadow that moved with you, stretching and twisting with each thought, shifting from absence into something alive, something pulsing with the weight of unfinished moments. It wasn't empty. It was full of everything that could have been, a presence that haunted the edges of memory. It became a weight you carried without realizing, a drone beneath every breath, a vibration that hummed through the fabric of your thoughts, warping the contours of memory until even silence felt heavy, laced with echoes of things left undone. His absence wasn't a void. It was a force that seeped through time's cracks, carving its way into your being like water, finding the weakest points in stone. It reshaped you in ways you never noticed, inscribing itself into the spaces between who you were and who you thought you'd become. And it wasn't his voice that lingered in the quiet moments. It was the ache of its absence, an unresolved chord stretching through the years, vibrating faintly in the hollow spaces where his presence was supposed to resonate. You wondered, did he think of you? Did he trace your outline in his mind, only for your image to blur at the edges, fading before it became clear? Did he stand in the distance, always watching but never stepping closer? A figure, perpetually out of reach, dissolving into twilight. Or was he too, adrift, a ghost even to himself, wandering through rooms that no longer remembered him? The questions splintered and twisted with time, becoming something more than curiosities. They became prisms, refracting his absence into countless possibilities, each fragment sharper than the last. You stared into them, trying to make sense of the reflections, but every angle distorted into a version of him that dissolved before you could hold it. Mirrors lie, bending truth into something unrecognizable. And the questions did the same, slipping into the fractures of your mind, widening the hollow spaces they were meant to fill. They didn't lead to answers. They became shadows moving on the periphery, shifting forms that vanished when you turned to look. Each question carried its own gravity, pulling you inward into places where memory crumbled and imagination took over, where the lines between what was and what could have been twisted like smoke in the wind. They weren't just questions. They were remnants of something ancient and unfinished, spiraling through the hollow of your thoughts like wind through a crumbling corridor. Each fragment hovered at the edges of perception, flickering like faint light through cracked glass, only to dissolve before meaning could form. They pressed into the air, lingering as an ache, not a sound, but a vibration buried beneath the surface, like something ancient stirring beneath layers of forgotten time. The ache wasn't in the asking. It was in the listening, in the hollow where sound should have resonated but never did. It was in the tension of waiting for a voice that never came, a melody interrupted before the first note could be struck. The spaces between the questions weren't empty. They vibrated with the weight of what had been lost to time, a hum that pressed against the air like a distant storm gathering strength. The absence wasn't silent. It was movement without direction, an endless circling of phantoms that left the room dense with something unspoken, something that lingered in the corners like dust, collecting in forgotten places. Memory is never linear. It folds and bends like paper worn thin, creased with moments that bleed into each other and refuse to hold their shape. Time becomes liquid, pooling in strange places, flowing backward and sideways, seeping into cracks where forgotten moments lie dormant. You walk through these folds, but nothing stays still. Images warp and distort, shifting into versions of themselves you no longer recognize. The past doesn't sit quietly. It flickers like candlelight caught in a restless wind, casting shadows that ripple across your thoughts, stretching beyond the edges of your mind. You find yourself circling the same thoughts, the same questions, but they're never quite the same. They splinter and refract, becoming fragmented reflections in a broken mirror, faces blurred by time, voices lost to static. You reach for them, but they dissolve before they can be held, slipping through your fingers like water slipping through stone. His absence wasn't a clean break. It was a slow erosion, a quiet unraveling that carved itself into your being. It wasn't a scar. Scars heal, harden, but something softer, more insidious. It seeped through the fabric of who you were, staining everything with the weight of what wasn't there. It pressed against the edges of your identity, bending your reflection until even silence carried his shape, until your shadow blurred into his. And then came the breaking, gradual, unnoticed, like water seeping through cracks in stone, until the whole structure shifted under its weight. It wasn't loud, not at first. It was the quiet crumble of certainty, the subtle shattering of edges. You looked in the mirror one day and saw fragments, pieces of someone you no longer recognized. His absence wasn't a wound to be mended. It became the gravity that pulled you apart from within, leaving shards of yourself scattered, waiting to be rearranged into something entirely different, something you never expected to become. And still you drift, caught between past and present, real and imagined. The space he left behind isn't empty. It's alive with what could have been, stretching and shifting like smoke curling through the air, too intangible to grasp, but too heavy to ignore. It fills the cracks in memory with something unfinished, something that hums beneath the surface like a note left hanging, unresolved. You carry it with you, not as a wound to heal, but as a presence that lingers, reshaping you in ways you'll never fully understand. And so you drift between the layers of memory, never quite reaching the center. The stories you told yourself dissolve into mist, leaving behind only impressions, fragments of touch without texture, sounds without source, glimpses of things that might have been but never solidified. It's a sinking, slow, inevitable, like a stone descending into water, the ripples closing above, erasing the point of entry. The descent isn't backward, it's inward, folding into the places where light doesn't reach, where past and present cling to each other like shadow and shape, indistinguishable. Reality unravels, strands of thought loosening, fraying at the edges. Memory becomes vapor, imagination becomes weight, and you are left hovering in the blur, caught between what was real and what you invented to survive. You sit with the questions, not to find answers, but because they hum beneath the surface like a distant, unrelenting tune, a song you've never learned but can never forget. They've threaded themselves into your being, threads of uncertainty tangled into the fabric of your thoughts, warping the contours of memory and reshaping the edges of who you think you are. His absence isn't a missing piece. It's a frame that holds everything together, a tension that pulls at the seams. And in that absence, you glimpse fragments of yourself, flickering like light through cracked glass, fractured and incomplete. Each reflection distorts as you reach for it, slipping into shadow before form can take hold, until something inside you cracks, not loud, not sudden, but like glass under pressure, a splintering you only notice when the shards begin to press into your skin. It's not the questions that break you. It's the quiet realization that they've always been there, threading through your thoughts like veins through stone. You've carried this weight for so long that you no longer know where it ends and you begin. And now, in the stillness, the fracture spreads, invisible, inevitable, until the pieces of who you thought you were start to fall away, leaving only the hollow echo of everything you've never said.